So, Ali, the funeral of Michael Gaine will be held tomorrow morning in Kerry. It's been a very sad occasion, and obviously the eyes of the country are still on it. We had a story today about how some of his friends have got his rally card together because, of course, he was a very popular guy locally.
Yeah, he seemed to have been very well liked, very well got by the community there in Kerry. And they've arranged quite a lovely tribute to him. Really, they've kind of renovated his old rally car, and I think it's going to be going in a procession containing his ashes around Kenmare after the funeral, which seems, quite a kind of fitting tribute to the man. And I think he had a lot of friends in the rally community there. He was quite an active rally driver himself, so I'd say that will be quite an emotional event, really, the entire funeral. Yes. For everybody. I'd imagine it'll be huge as well now. I'll imagine there'll be a huge amount of people will be present,
Yeah, and of course when somebody popular locally dies, certainly in parts of rural Ireland, you'll have a big following, a big attendance. But of course the reason that the national eye is on this is because of the manner of how Michael Gaine was killed. Now, in terms of the investigation, we're still waiting for the next stage of developments, but it certainly is proving to be a very complex case.
Yeah, hugely so. And I think, as we all know now, the main reason I think that there hasn't been a major development is because it did take such a significant amount of time for his body to be found. I think it was 8 weeks, Niall, after his disappearance.
Yeah,
I think it was. So I mean, there's potentially a huge amount of loss of evidence there. And unfortunately, he seems to have been dismembered to such an extent that evidence has been difficult to come by, I suppose. And the fact that he was in a slurry tank, as we also know, would have kind of complicated matters further. So, really, since the arrest of the suspect, the Garda suspect, Michael Kelley, who has said now on numerous occasions he's had nothing at all to do with the death of his former boss. But since that arrest, which was a few weeks ago now, we really haven't had any significant development whatsoever.
No, because obviously Michael Gaine's remains were found in this slurry tank 8 weeks on, and certainly whatever chemical processes would have gone on. Certainly the first stage would be the guards would have to, first they had to identify his remains, but then they'll have to try and determine a cause of death. All of that is really complex stuff.
It is, yeah. And I mean, there could even be further forensic results given to the Garda based on examination of some of his body parts. There could actually be a little bit more coming, I've heard, just in terms of how he may have been dismembered. But that's not even a definite because of the fact that he was in that slurry tank, and because of the deterioration of his body and the fact that it then went through a machine essentially as well when the slurry was being spread, that it just complicates all of it hugely, And I think if his body had been found much more swiftly, there might have been a much better chance for evidence to have survived essentially.
Now, as you said, Michael Kelley, who was an American man who's lived in Ireland for a number of years, and he worked as a farmhand on Michael Gaine's farm and was living on a property on his land. He was arrested. We're naming him because he has done a number of interviews where he's described himself as a suspect and said he's on it's a matter of public record. I think is how he described it, as being a suspect. However, he's been very categorical and very clear in that he denies any involvement and, has made that very clear and with a number of interviews in a number of different media outlets. Now, you wrote about him, and he was also written about in the Sunday World over the weekend. I think you spoke to people who would have known him back in the US.
Yeah, we spoke to a family member essentially of the Garda suspect, Michael Kelley. And they spoke highly of him, essentially. This person said that they didn't think that he could be capable of murder, essentially. I think they described him as a gentle lion and someone who's kind of highly intelligent and, always generous to people. Now, at the same time, this person did add that they hadn't spoken to him in well over a decade. But this person certainly didn't think that the Michael Kelley they knew could be capable of murder. So we just kind of highlighted that at the weekend, yeah.
Yeah, and of course, we also in the Sunday World, Patrick O'Connell had a story about, I suppose it was about the breakdown of a relationship he was in. And in the US, it's very different. There's if you go through a divorce or something similar like that, it's very public. These documents are up online.
But it's entirely different, yeah.
And those documents spoke about the breakdown of that relationship and the court proceedings that followed. And I suppose the judge had made a determination, and he made some comments about Mr. Kelley, not being impressed, I suppose, ultimately with the quality of evidence he gave.
That was it, yeah. I mean, I think the judge said that, in his view, Mr. Kelley had a questionable ability to determine fact from fiction. And he had some kind of other choice words about kind of the manner in which Mr. Kelley had kind of conducted himself and made accusations against his now ex-wife. I think including that he accused her of witchcraft against the children, which the judge said was kind of completely unfounded, essentially. Mr. Kelley, who, as you said there, has been quite outspoken and speaking quite freely to the press when the press come across him when he's been busking and things like that in Tralee where he's living, and he's had an awful lot to say about, well, first of all, he's maintaining his complete innocence, but he confirmed his arrest, and he confirmed that he used to work for Mike Gaine. He said that I don't think he quite described himself as a friend of his, more that they just kind of worked well together. And he's kind of given different explanations and accounts of the last time he saw Mike Gaine before he disappeared, and he's spoken a lot about his life and his background. And look, he certainly had a lot to say, and I presume that the Garda are kind of paying attention to everything he's saying publicly, and that's being either printed or broadcast then in the media.
Yeah, because
as they continue to build up a picture,
Yeah, and of course, the guards did profile a number of people. I think that's been well reported as well in the aftermath.
Yeah, they did, of course. Yeah. I think when a number of people and several were kind of ruled out kind of promptly enough. And I mean, the case still is wide open. I think it'd be unwise of the Garda to only focus on one particular person. Like he obviously is a suspect because he was arrested, but I think it'd be unwise, and we've seen cases in the past when the Garda, if they focus too rigidly on one particular person, you can kind of not see the wood from the trees then almost, So I think there's a view that Gardaí and Kerry, and I think the Garda National Bureau of Criminal Investigation are involved as well, of trying to kind of maintain very much an open mind. And I think, they have been in touch with the authorities in America where Mr. Kelley is from. I think he's from Maine. And he's spoken about being a former soldier, and whether or not he's a former soldier or the level of that, I hear is kind of in dispute somewhat. But he certainly seems to have some very kind of loose link to the army, but whether or not he was an actual serving soldier, I think is kind of being questioned, I believe. But look, he's certainly out there. He's talking. I think he said he's not going to the funeral tomorrow, out of respect for Mike Gaine. I think was the most recent thing I heard him saying in the last kind of 24 hours. I think he feels that maybe that his presence might, draw from what the mourners are actually there for, which is to pay their respects
and of
to
course,
Mike Gaine.
Unusually, like Michael Kelley applied for asylum in Ireland despite being a US citizen, which I can't imagine there's many US citizens who've been granted asylum in Ireland. What do we know about that?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, it would be
Yeah,
unusual.
I think that was a number of years ago that he applied for asylum. And certainly America wouldn't be on the list of countries that is seen as, a dangerous place to live, So his application was processed and ultimately rejected, and he was later kind of served with a deportation notification. So it's not quite a deportation order where he's, to be put in a plane and sent home. It's not anywhere near that stage. It's a very early stage of a deportation. So he has been served with that, but that's some time ago. That's a long time before anything ever happened to Michael Gaine. So he is subject to that. So he could essentially down the line be deported, or he could also just leave voluntarily. And at the moment, because Gardaí made an arrest quite swiftly, I think it was about 36 hours after Mike Gaine's remains were found, they made this arrest. Gardaí can't rearrest Michael Kelley unless they have any new evidence against him. So he's entirely free to leave the country, but he doesn't appear to want to leave the country based on what he said. And also, I think we reported the other week, he doesn't actually have a passport either. So at the moment, I suppose he actually can't. But he doesn't seem inclined. And from speaking to locals down there over the last few days, like he's become very much like a celebrity in Tralee, and he's been constantly approached, and people are constantly talking to him, and he's kind of, everywhere he goes, like people are pointing at him and looking at him, because this has really consumed the community. I mean, it's consumed the whole country, this terrible case, but it's really particularly consumed local people. So I mean, I can't imagine that's very easy for Michael Kelley to kind of become this kind of famous figure overnight every time he leaves his accommodation in Tralee. So you'd have to wonder why he would want to stay in Ireland. I mean, I think a lot of people wouldn't want to stay in Ireland if that was what their life had become. But he does seem to want to stay.
Yeah, look, it's certainly an unusual case in many ways. I suppose in the longer term, one of the issues with a case like this is if a murder occurs in Dublin, and it can take years for this to happen, but the guards will be able to piece together CCTV evidence. They'll be able to maybe pick up witnesses, people who walk past an area. Because of that part of Kerry, which is so rural and quiet, none of that is going to really be a feature in this investigation, or it seems unlikely to be.
Yeah, I think that is the case. I mean, the guards obviously released images from the CCTV of Mike Gaine in the local shop a few hours, I think, before he went missing, where he was buying phone credit and a few other items. And then we know he drove back to his farm, which was a few miles from his actual home, shared with his wife. And they just know from the fact that his car was found in the yard that's where he went from the shop back to his farm. And after that, it's unknown, because it's a very rural area, and there wouldn't be CCTV. But I mean, given the fact that he kind of seems to have disappeared, well, his body was found within his farmyard, as we know. So it's unlikely there would have been CCTV there anyway, I suppose, is the reality.
Yeah.
But I think the big issue is really the length of time it took to unfortunately find his remains. And we all know about the slurry tank and the fact that it was searched, but nothing was found. And you'd have to wonder, I think there might be questions to be answered there. I mean, I just was reading there just before this that there's a review now. The Garda Commissioners is called a review of the Satchwell case, about how her remains weren't found more promptly. And you'd have to wonder if, sometime down the line, whether there might be similar questions asked about this investigation, about how a slurry pit and tank could be searched and no remains found, and then for them to emerge, when family and a neighbour were spreading slurry. And you just have to wonder that loss of time, the impact that had on the criminal investigation.
You would imagine it is significant. So thanks, Ali, for joining us. Michael's will be, he's at the funeral home, Finnegan's funeral home tonight in Kenmare, and his mass is tomorrow morning at 10:30 at the Holy Cross Church in Kenmare. And then I think there's a cortege will be brought around the town. So it will be a very sad moment
Oh, it will.
and a man that, you haven't been able to find a single person to say a bad word about him following his demise. So very, very tragic case.
Yeah, it is. It's a very sad case, and I think there'll be huge interest in the funeral, and I think the family kind of deserve that time and and all of his loved ones to kind of pay their respects. And then I suppose we'll all just kind of awaiting then to see if there's developments in the criminal investigation in the coming weeks. But for the moment, there doesn't seem to be anything stirring that we're aware of. But look, that can change almost within a moment as well, So we just have to hope that there is some developments, for the sake of the family, who've really been through the mill.
That's exactly right. So thanks very much, Ali, and we had no doubt it'll be a story that we'll come back to again over the next few weeks.
Thanks, Niall. Take it easy.
Thanks.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.